Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the historic Chief Theater in beautiful downtown Steamboat Springs. I think it's worth mentioning a couple of things. One is the Winter Olympics are starting this week, and for those of you who are from out of town, Steamboat Springs is home to more Winter Olympians than any other city in America. And also, I had to laugh. I was very glad we had our name on the marquee out front, but did you notice it said Steamboat Institute, we're not clowns? Okay, let's start like we always do with the Pledge of Allegiance. So if everyone would please stand and join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thanks. Please be seated. I know some of you have probably never been to a Steamboat Institute event, so welcome if you have not. We're always happy to have new folks, and I know being ski season, there are probably some people in town who hopefully just saw this in the newspaper and decided to come on over. The Steamboat Institute does promote conservative principles, but we always like to remind our audiences that everyone is welcome, regardless of ideology. We just ask that you come with an open mind, and we like to put on events that make you think, that use your critical thinking skills. We always keep things respectful and reasoned in the debates and talks we have, so we hope you will enjoy this tonight. I know you're in for a real treat with Bob Kaufman, who I'll introduce here in just a few minutes. One of the things that the Steamboat Institute has that we're very proud of is our Tony Blankley Journalism Fellowship, called the Tony Blankley Chair for Public Policy and American Exceptionalism. It's named for Tony Blankley, who of course was a master journalist and communicator. He was editorial page editor of the Washington Times. He was a longtime panelist on the McLaughlin Group, which was kind of the original political talk show before Fox News and CNN and all these others. And we're really pleased that one of our first Tony Blankley Fellow that we named back in 2014, Tom Rogan, is now the new host of the McLaughlin Group since Dr. McLaughlin passed away. So it's really wonderful to have our Tony Blankley Chair now as the new moderator of the McLaughlin Group, which is back on the airwaves and on the internet. One of our other Tony Blankley Fellows, Kelsey Harkness, brilliant young journalist, does a lot of video production work for the Daily Signal, which is part of the Heritage Foundation. She's going to be live streaming our Campus Liberty Tour that I'm going to tell you about here in just a minute. Our other Blankley Fellows, Hadley Heath Manning is the Policy Director of the Independent Women's Forum, and Jillian Melcher, who's now a former fellow because she joined the Wall Street Journal editorial page as a writer. So we're so proud of the national impact that all of our Tony Blankley Fellows are having. I just wanted to share that with you. Now, let me tell you about some upcoming events that I think you're going to be very interested in. Some of you may have noticed we hadn't been doing any events the last few months. That's because we have been so busy planning what I'm about to tell you about that it has taken up all of our time. Very happy to announce that the first week of April will be our inaugural Campus Liberty Tour debate tour. As some of you know, we have been doing some events with the University of Colorado's Conservative Thought and Policy program for the last 3 years, and we have decided to step it up several notches by doing a nationwide campus debate tour. We see a need, as I'm sure many of you will agree, to present a broader perspective on many college campuses, to show that all ideologies should be welcome, that students should be having reasoned, respectful debates, and learn how to use their critical thinking skills. So, the first week of April, our inaugural Campus Liberty Tour is going to be a debate on nationalism versus globalism. The two debaters will be Nigel Farage, who was, of course, the architect of the Brexit movement in Great Britain, and Vicente Fox, the former president of Mexico. So it should be a spirited debate. I can assure you that in the Steamboat Institute tradition, it will be respectful and reasoned. We have 4 stops on our debate tour. The first one will be Monday, April 2nd at CU in Boulder. The moderator will be Dr. Bob Kaufman, who you're going to hear from here in just a few moments. Tuesday, April 3rd, the debate will move to CU in Colorado Springs, where the moderator will be Tom Rogan, our Blankley Fellow, who is also a columnist for the Washington Examiner. Then on Thursday, April 5th, we will travel to the University of Maryland in College Park. That debate will be moderated by Mary Kissel of the Wall Street Journal editorial board. The following morning in Washington, D.C., the Bipartisan Policy Center is hosting a breakfast for our sponsors and our speakers, Mr. Farage and Mr. Fox. And then that night, we will travel one more time for a 4th debate to Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania for the final debate, where Mary Kissel will also be the moderator. So we are kicking it off in a big way with our Campus Liberty Tour. I will just tell you some of the sponsors and groups that are collaborating with us to help us put on these debates on the different campuses: the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, the Mill Series at Lafayette College, the Bipartisan Policy Center in Washington, D.C., the Snyder Center for Enterprise and Markets at University of Maryland, the Center for the Study of Government and the Individual at CU Colorado Springs, the Woodford Foundation for Limited Government, the Center for Western Civilization, Thought and Policy at CU Boulder, which is, of course, where Professor Kaufman is, the Free to Be Student Debate Club at Boulder, and locally we have some great support here, local residents and businesses who are supporting our Campus Liberty Tour. Mountain Valley Bank, Ed and June MacArthur, and Tim and Janet Borden have all stepped up to help sponsor our Campus Debate Tour. And we are planning for this to be something ongoing, where we will be bringing speakers and debates to college campuses all across the country. We will be doing some more this fall. So you'll be getting emails. If you're not already on our email list, please sign up. Go to steamboatinstitute.org. And get on our email list, because we will be selling tickets. So you can buy a ticket if you want to go to one of the debates, and we hope you will, and that you'll share it with your friends. A couple of other things real quickly I would like to tell you about. Coming up in, this will be also April, but also June. We're going to split this into 2 different time periods. We are joining with some other groups around the state to do what we are calling the I Love Tabor Roadshow. Now, how many of you know what Tabor stands for? And I'm being blinded by the lights, so I can't really see. Some of you do, but it looks like a lot of you don't, which is why we're doing the I Love Tabor Roadshow. You need to know why you need to love Tabor too. Tabor is the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, which was passed by Colorado voters back in 1992. It's to limit the growth of government spending based on a formula that's population growth and inflation. And I won't go into the details tonight, but just know that the Steamboat Institute is partnering with the Independence Institute, Americans for Prosperity, the Colorado Union of Taxpayers, the Independent Women's Forum, and a few other groups to do a Tabor Roadshow all around the state of Colorado. It will include Steamboat and some other Western Slope communities. So be watching your email for that, but we're going to let people know that's one of the reasons Colorado has such a great economic environment. It's because of the limits on government growth and spending that have been because of Tabor being law in Colorado. And finally, the big one. This year, hard to believe, this is going to be our 10th annual Freedom Conference and Festival coming up in August. How many of you have joined us before for the Freedom Conference? I think there are several of you in here. Yeah, great. If you've not been, you may have heard about it. It's going to be another great event. We're pulling out all the stops for the 10th annual. It's a little bit earlier this year. It's August 10th and 11th. We just made the registration site live today. So if you want to get a jump on things, you can register for the Freedom Conference. As you know, we always put on a good event up at the Grand. Some of our past speakers have included Vice President Cheney, then Congressman Mike Pence actually spoke at our very first conference in 2009. And as you know, we always get the best and brightest, and this year will be no different. So be sure to register at steamboatinstitute.org. We'd love to have you. I would like to thank some of the major sponsors who have already signed up for the Freedom Conference: Jenny and Rich Srednicki, David and Debbie Dacus, Chris and Bill Benzler, Ron and Chenza Lazoff, and Bill and Tony Thompson have already signed up as major sponsors. So really appreciate you all, and we hope everyone will get registered for the Freedom Conference. All right, now the reason you all are here tonight is to hear from Professor Bob Kaufman. Let me tell you just a little bit about him, and then I'm going to let him take over. Bob Kaufman is the 2017-18 Visiting Scholar in Conservative Thought and Policy at CU Boulder. He is the 5th professor to hold that position. I know some of you were surprised that there was a conservative professor from Boulder. And let me tell you, if you think that's the case, you have been missing out what's going on over there. There's some great things happening on the Boulder campus, and Bob is a prime example of that. He is also the Robert and Catherine Dotson Professor of Public Policy at the Pepperdine University School of Public Policy out in California. So he will be returning to California at the end of this academic year. Professor Kaufman received his JD from Georgetown Law in Washington, D.C., and his bachelor's, 2 master's, and a doctoral degree from Columbia in New York City. In May of 2016, he received an advanced law degree in dispute resolution from the Pepperdine School of Law in Malibu. He is no stranger to the Boulder campus, having participated for 9 years in the CU Conference on World Affairs, which is held every year in April. Professor Kaufman has written for scholarly journals and popular publications including Weekly Standard, Policy Review, the Washington Times, the Baltimore Sun, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. He has written 4 books, including his most recent, Dangerous Doctrine: How Obama's Grand Strategy Weakened America. That is the book that is for sale out in the lobby, and Professor Kaufman will be signing copies of his book after he speaks, so hope everyone will get a copy. He also assisted President Nixon in the research and writing of Nixon's final book, Beyond Peace. He is a former Bradley Scholar and current adjunct scholar at the Heritage Foundation. He has also taught at Colgate University, the Naval War College, and the University of Vermont. So he's had a good dose of progressivism and liberalism. Let's see, Vermont, California, and then Boulder. So this is one brave individual who's about to take the stage tonight. But perhaps most impressive, and the last thing I want to share with you before Professor Kaufman comes up, most impressive is this letter that was written by a CU student who took one of Professor Kaufman's classes last semester. She wrote this letter to CU President Bruce Benson. She said, "Dear Mr. Benson, I'm a junior attending the University of Colorado at Boulder studying political science and business. I'm writing you this letter in thanks for your implementation and commitment to the Center for Western Civilization, Thought, and Policy. As a poli-sci student that doesn't typically agree with the majority of other students here in Boulder, the center created an amazing opportunity for me to find others with similar ideas to mine, and to be exposed to conservative scholars who challenged me to think from all perspectives." And I won't read the whole letter, but I'll skip ahead. She said, "As I became more involved as an undergraduate fellow, I decided to take one of the poli-sci classes offered through the center. This past fall semester, I was a member of Professor Robert Kaufman's International Relations class on Terrorism and Modern Warfare in America. This was the most interesting and captivating political science course that I have taken at CU thus far. Kaufman challenged the class to have our own opinions, independent from his, but also held us accountable and expected that we back them up with valid evidence and sources. He created a comfortable learning environment where I was excited to come to class each day to hear his clever metaphors on the various topics of American warfare. Instead of spewing his political agenda, Professor Kaufman pushed bigger thinking and created a fair classroom environment. Boulder is an amazing place to live and go to school, but it tends to lean more to the left on the political spectrum. As a young adult who wants to learn both sides rather than jump in with the opinions of the majority, I appreciate the opportunities that the Western Civ program has given me and the resources that come with it. It is a major asset to the poli-sci department, but also the university as a whole. Sincerely, and she signed her name, CU Class of 2019. And with that, let's give a warm steamboat welcome to Professor Bob Kaufman.
Good evening, Jennifer. Thanks for the kind introduction. This is probably a more sympathetic audience than I'm used to. Tonight's talk is really a hybrid of my fourth book, which is out in the kiosk, and the book that I'm about to embark on that today I got an advance contract for, namely a book about Donald Trump's foreign policy. There's something about me, given my temperament and interests, that I tend to gravitate to topics and positions that qualify me for the witness protection program. This is no exception. Donald Trump's foreign policy. The content and trajectory of President Trump's foreign policy have defied the expectations of many of his supporters as well as many of his critics. And let me be autobiographical. I was very skeptical about President Trump during his primary campaign. I'm a Reagan internationalist. And to my thinking, when President Trump, then candidate Trump, called himself an America Firster, I'm not sure he understood invoking Charles Lindbergh's moniker. I worried that Trump was going to be a conservative version of President Obama, who dangerously weakened the United States by his policy of strategic retrenchment and dangerously shrinking the American military. As late as September 2016, I wrote an editorial in the Wall Street Journal that got fairly wide airplay, lamenting what is a Reagan conservative to do in this election. Now, I couldn't vote for Hillary Clinton. I'd rather have my legs devoured by Dobermans than fasting. In my view, Hillary Clinton was the first mate on Obama's foreign policy Titanic. So I couldn't do that. I was worried, however, that based on an extended interview that President Trump gave in March of 2016 to the editorial board of the Washington Post, that Trump was aiming to be an isolationist whose result, although the rationale was different, would be similar to Obama's. For instance, Trump said during that interview repeatedly, we had benefited not once, ever, from our alliance with South Korea and Japan. I think that's dangerously wrong. Trump said, NATO, it's time to go, it's obsolete. He said that repeatedly. So I was worried that Trump was not only going to be the un-Obama, but the anti-Reagan. So far, I am presently surprised. The president has moved a long way from his campaign positions of denigrating the value of America's democratic alliances and renouncing America's essential role as the world's default power, deterring hegemonic threats in vital geopolitical regions. No one else can play that role. The president has fired Steve Bannon, the paladin of a sizable segment of Trump's core constituency, clamoring for an American strategic retrenchment, different in rationale, but similar in dangerous outcome to Obama's dangerous doctrine that perilously weakened America. Indeed, Trump's core national security team, Secretary of Defense James Mattis, UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, and National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, consider America's military, political, and economic power indispensable to deterring in defeating global threats menacing to America's enlightened self-interest. What President Trump calls, it's his name for it, principled realism, has not crystallized into a formal doctrine. It may never, given President Trump. Let's be honest. President Trump's volatility and unpredictability, partially cultivated, but some of it genuinely intrinsic, makes any prognostication about President Trump an endeavor marinating in conditions and caveats. For all that, Trump's actions speak louder and more favorably about the substance of his national security policy than his often contradictory, provocative, and confused words on the subject. Consider Trump's presidency, domestically and internationally, and I'll focus on the international side, the un-Obama. What President Trump strives to do, and I think rightly, is to dismantle and reverse everything President Obama did domestically and internationally. Suffice it to say, as a preface to what I'm going to say, I wish President Trump well in that endeavor. Several core premises have emerged. Again, they're in the process of formation, and whenever we talk about President Trump, we're not talking about Ronald Reagan. We're not talking about a conviction politician like Reagan, who had 40 years of clear, steadfast convictions that he adhered to through thick and thin. President Trump is like eating Spam. You don't quite know what you're getting, and you don't know what's going to be in the next bite. And you may not like the next bite. Nevertheless, several core premises have emerged that have provisionally put the United States on a much better course so that we are much better off provisionally, so long as this trajectory continues, than we were a year ago, or we would have been had Hillary Clinton won, literally continuing Obama's doctrine for a third term. What are these premises? Here they go. There are 8 of them. First, President Trump views international relations as a largely zero-sum game, requiring American vigilance and a preponderance of power. His principled realism, as he calls it, categorically rejects the illusions of Obama and progressives that international institutions, postmodern norms, render the ineradicable danger of war obsolete. As Secretary of Defense James Mattis put it in his splendid summary of national defense strategy, which the Department of Defense issued a few weeks ago, I quote, Mattis wrote, "We're emerging from a period of strategic atrophy, aware that our competitive military advantage has eroded. We must restore it." Or as Mattis predicted presciently at CSIS in Washington in April of 2016, before he was Secretary of Defense, the next administration will inherit a strategic mess. Trump inherited a strategic mess. President Trump has acknowledged, less often in word than in deed, that no adequate substitutes exist for American power, while demanding simultaneously that our allies bear their fair share. In contrast to President Obama, progressives, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and that crowd views American power as the greatest danger to the world, what's called the arrogance of American power. President Trump rejects that wisely based on the lessons of history. As President Trump sees it, The greatest dangers arise when our foes perceive us as irresolute and weak, as they have perceived us for the previous 8 years before Trump became president. President Trump has committed the United States to rebuilding the American military, which Obama's build down dangerously ravaged. This is the single most important measure the United States can take to restore the robustness of deterrence in vital geopolitical regions that Obama's 8-year assault on the moral and material legitimacy of American power imperiled. The Trump administration aims at nothing less than reversing this perilous erosion of American hard power that occurred during the Obama years. That's the first thing. Second, President Trump, unlike his predecessor, accords precedence in terms of ranking threats, the threats emanating from great power rivals such as Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, rather than global warming, nuclear proliferation, or failed states. Or as James Mattis put it, interstate strategic competition, not terrorism, global warming, nuclear weapons per se, regardless of who wields them, is once again the primary concern of American national security strategy, as it should be. Unlike President Obama, who considered China as a strategic partner, the Trump administration rightly defines China in its recent national security documents as the #1 challenge of the 21st century that the United States will face. Again, in the words of General Mattis, a strategic competitor using predatory economics to intimidate its neighbors while militarizing the East and South China Sea as part of a grand strategy to dominate the Indo-Pacific region, the major power center of the world for the 21st century. We can't let that happen. President Trump won't. After briefly flirting with some version of Obama's feckless reset with Russia, the Trump administration has restored a large measure of strategic and moral clarity to Putin's neo-imperialist ambitions. Trump administration ranks Russia as the second most important long-term geopolitical threat we face. Russia, warns General Mattis, seeks veto authority over nations on its periphery in terms of government, economic, and diplomatic decisions. Russia, warns General Mattis, seeks to shatter NATO and to change European and Middle East security and economic structure in their favor. Luckily, so far, the administration's robust response has matched the implications of General Mattis's warning. President Trump has bolstered deterrence against Russian imperialism by reaffirming the importance of NATO, by increasing the American military presence in Eastern Europe, by resisting rather than enabling Russia's subversion of Ukraine's independence, by arming Ukraine freedom fighters that Obama would not, and most importantly, by accelerating the development and deployment of missile defense, including in Eastern Europe, which the Obama administration opposed. The Trump administration likewise rightly ranks North Korea and Iran as the #3 and #4 threats that the United States faces. Contrast this with the Obama administration. If you look at the Obama administration's national security statements, 2010, 2012, reiterated in 2015, there's not one mention of great power threats. There's not one mention of the danger of China's hegemonic ambitions and the increasingly repressive trends domestically that fuel it. There's not one mention of Putin's neo-Stalinist ambitions. In 2005, you don't have to be Clausewitz to figure out what Putin's up to. 2005, Putin told his legislature in public, I'm paraphrasing, Putin said, the most terrible thing that happened in the 20th century, said Putin, was the demise of the Soviet Union. The infernal empire that, according to the Black Book of Communism, published by Harvard University Press, edited not by Fox News, but by Frenchmen, according to the Black Book of Communism, the Soviet regime was responsible for the murder of 100 million people. Yet President Obama wanted to enable Putin rather than resist him. Imagine if Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, got up today and said, I'm feeling sad. Why, Chancellor Merkel? Well, I'm thinking about the greatest tragedy of the 20th century, the surrender of the Third Reich on May 9, 1945. The moral equivalent of the Soviet Union. Would anybody say, oh gee, that's a healthy partner for peace? Yet Obama and his Sancho Panza, John Kerry from my native state of Massachusetts, the backbone of a chocolate eclair microwaved on high for 10 minutes, enabled Putin for 8 years. Trump has ended that. Trump has also renounced the Prozac of a nuclear deal with a virulently anti-American, anti-Semitic, fanatical, hegemonic Iranian regime. A deal that, even if the Iranians abide by it, will facilitate them crossing the nuclear threshold. A deal that Obama negotiated in his unwisdom that you couldn't verify because it depended on the Iranians giving inspectors assets and access to sites which historically they have hidden. And even in the rare event that we detected a violation, the Obama administration, in its unwisdom, said that if sanctions, quote unquote, were to snap back, it would require the approval of the United Nations Security Council, which includes China, our enemy, Russia, our enemy, and France, the ally I liken to hemorrhoids, painful to the end. What is the likelihood that the United Nations Security Council would snap back sanctions in the unlikely event that we detected a violation? The Iran agreement was Prozac. And if you want to understand where we were heading with the Iran agreement, go back to North Korea in 1994, when Bill Clinton sent, I think, Obama's political father, Jimmy Carter, to negotiate a deal. And according to the deal, we would pay the North Koreans hundreds of millions of dollars and build them civilian nuclear reactors in exchange for their reliable promise not to cheat. Poor Carter, he's wrong about everything. On the tarmac justifying Bill Clinton's Munich, which was the ghost of Christmas future for the Iran deal, Carter said of Kim Il-sung, he has a good heart. Now, this is one of the worst dictators of the 20th century. But Carter is not even physiologically right. 3 days after Carter said Kim Il-sung had a good heart, he died of a massive coronary. Move up to 2002. And the North Koreans announced they lied. They pocketed the money. President Trump renouncing the Iran deal stops the self-delusion of the Obama administration. And the other thing that President Trump has done in the Middle East, by finally identifying Iran as an enemy rather than a potential partner for peace, he has restored the critical distinction that Obama lost between America's friends and foes. One of the staples of Obama's foreign policy was that we should engage our adversaries, put distance between the United States and its traditional friends. And by the time Obama left, he had unwittingly created the basis of a very strange coalition that Trump has forged between countries that are not natural partners. For all their differences, the Egyptians, the Israelis, and the Saudis agree with President Trump that it is better to cooperate with each other rather than enable Iran. The other thing Trump has done in the Middle East that will resonate positively, two things, not just in the Middle East but elsewhere, is one, President Trump has ended the era of appeasement of America's enemies. President Trump has ended the era of betraying your stable, liberal, democratic friends the way Obama did, canceling missile defense as one of his first official acts in Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary in the vain attempt to enlist Putin as a partner for peace. Putin took us to the cleaners not only in Europe, but also in Syria. President Trump's courageous, correct, and strategically wise decision to move the American embassy in Israel to Jerusalem sent the world a signal that we stand by our friends and we don't stab our friends in the back. This is enormously significant globally for restoring American credibility. The second thing Trump has done in the Middle East that will resonate positively everywhere is that President Obama gave priority in the Middle East, not only to appeasing our adversaries, but to withdrawal rather than consolidating victory. Literally, and even Joe Biden admitted it in 2009, whatever you think of the Iraq War, we won it. Vice President Biden said, whether I agreed with it or not, it's a success. We snatched defeat from the jaws of victory by making withdrawal a priority. Obama did the same thing in Afghanistan by announcing a surge and on the same day giving our enemies the day to intensify violence by saying we were going to withdraw on a time certain. Announcing our surge in 2016, 2017 to Afghanistan, President Trump has reversed that. According to President Trump, victory, rather than appeasing the lowest common denominator of a weak coalition, is now the American priority once again. We've already reaped the benefits of that in the Middle East. Under President Obama, the war against ISIS was half-hearted. It languished, it was heading to stalemate and eventual defeat because President Obama made the coalition primary to achieving the mission. Trump has ended that. By restoring strategic clarity once again, making victory the primary goal of the employment of military force, by making withdrawal not premature but based on conditions on the ground, we have defeated ISIS by changing the rules of engagement and applying American power decisively. That will resonate positively in many regions outside the Middle East. Likewise, in Asia, after 8 years of Obama's pivot that was hollow. How hollow is that pivot? Well, first of all, if you look at Obama's national security strategy, China wasn't a threat, it was global warming. Well, now it's climate change because there's may not be global warming, but whatever it is, Obama ignored the threat of China. Let me give you something concrete about how dangerous East Asia has become and how terrified East Asia is that the United States, after 8 years of Obama, can no longer be counted on to stop China. Since 2000, China has increased its military buildup annually by double digits. Since 2000, the Chinese have worked feverishly to develop an anti-access capability aimed to deny the United States in space, in the air, at sea, the credibility to back our allies. And meanwhile, the Obama administration had us on a course to have a Navy by 2020 of only 230 surface ships. Let me put that in context. 230 surface ships is a Navy smaller than we had in 1916 before we went into World War I. Woefully unprepared for what was to come. The Asia pivot was militarily hollow and relied on China's goodwill. Obama ignored the warnings of his chief of naval operations that at a minimum the United States needed a Navy of 300 surface ships. Obama said no, 230. President Trump, as part of his military buildup, has committed us to 350. That is a vital signal to our essential allies in East Asia that the United States will not abnegate the responsibilities which only the United States can fulfill. Likewise, the Trump administration has backed our Asian allies unstintingly in the escalating confrontation over North Korea's nuclear program. After initially flirting with an increasingly authoritarian, aggressive, and belligerent China, bent on hegemony in the world's most important geopolitical region, President Trump has quickly disabused himself of that illusion. Trump has wisely relied primarily on our democratic allies in the region, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, as well as cultivating new ones President Obama neglected. Perhaps the most important thing of all in the long term, President Trump has revived President George W. Bush's prescient initiative to facilitate a decent democratic India's rise as a counterweight to China and radical Islam, both of which existentially threaten Indian democracy. The pro-American, pro-market, pro-Israel, intrepid Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, could wind up as a veritable Indian Margaret Thatcher, a vital partner in defeating Islamic terror and deterring a hegemonic, increasingly aggressive China. There are some dangers, some uncertainties, despite this positive trend. First, President Trump's version of principled realism downplays principle, at least rhetorically, to excess, especially in his oft-repeated mantra that sounds like Obama, that we will never impose our values. This is wrong. This is politically untenable, strategically unwise. The most successful American grand strategies in history, particularly Truman's and Reagan's, largely succeeded not by ignoring American ideals, but by reconciling ideals and self-interest prudently. Here's some good news. It was reputed that Mark Twain said of the music of Wagner, "It's better than it sounds." I'm not sure that's the case with Wagner's music, but it is the case here. Notwithstanding Trump's unhealthy attraction to strong men such as Putin, Li Peng in China, the Islamist tyrant Erdogan in Turkey that initially led Trump astray. Trump's policy, again, is better than it sounds. Generally, he's given precedence to bolstering our decent democratic allies, Japan, South Korea, India, the Eastern European members of NATO, and Great Britain. The decent democratic Israel now knows it has a friend rather than an enemy in the White House. And Trump is absolutely right to make deals with authoritarian regimes when democratic allies aren't available to stop greater evils, such as Iran, where Saudi Arabia, despite its shortcomings, is a legitimate partner in that endeavor, and Vietnam, despite its shortcomings, is a legitimate partner in the endeavor to contain Chinese ambitions. Here's another problem with President Trump that looms on the horizon. President Trump's transactional view of politics, the art of the deal, distinguishes his principled realism unfavorably, in my view, from more venerable, reliable, durable versions of conservative internationalism such as Ronald Reagan's. Unharnessed to principle, the art of the deal can dangerously descend into unsteadiness, unpredictability, and expedience inimical to vindicating the national interest. Thirdly, Trump's economic nationalism carried to excess may undermine principle and realism. Whatever President Trump says, free trade usually is to our benefit. And the fourth thing that is menacing is President Trump's volatility. President Trump has a very serious case to make, grounded in America's first principles, that defending American sovereignty is critical to freedom. President Trump has a much better case than he has made because of his improvident rhetoric that the United States is pro-immigrant. We have been far more generous with immigrants than any country, and we benefited from legal immigration and legal immigration of those people who want to assimilate and become American rather than transform America into something else. Trump has a much better case on this than he's making by distracting the merits of the case with his rhetoric that makes him sound as if he's at a bar room on the Lower East Side at last call during St. Patrick's Day when Irish whiskey is flowing and mixed with beer in the form of a Boilermaker. That reveals that I began my career as a bartender on Nantucket Island. I don't drink, as my wife will say. With my personality, I make people drink. And as being a bartender and listening to the constituency that made me a professor, I decided I was going to do the talking. If President Trump could harness his rhetoric and elevate the discussion to the issue that without sovereignty, you don't have freedom, and that we are penalizing legal immigrants by rewarding illegal ones. And by the way, Canada and Australia are not dictatorships. They have need-based, merit-based immigration. This isn't racism. This isn't nativism. This isn't being anti-immigrant. This is common sense that freedom depends on the will to defend your borders and to impose and uphold the rule of law to keep us free. Trump should say that. And the other thing that President Trump is not going to find as easy to do, as his rhetoric that often sounds like Obama implies, is say, no regime change ever. We don't impose our values. That's nonsense. You don't do it all the time, and how you do it depends on prudence. But one of the great tragedies of World War I is that we left too soon, and that we let Germany decide what type of government it was going to have. The reason why there wasn't World War III is that we understood you don't go to democracy, you don't go to war because a country isn't a democracy, but if the war is caused by the ideology and aggressive nature of a regime, it's like cancer surgery. You have to change it. There was no World War III with Germany because we stayed the course. Now again, Trump's policies are probably better than his rhetoric. I take great encouragement that Nadia Shadlow, who wrote a wonderful book on this subject, is now H.R. McMaster's National Security Deputy, and she knows much better. And a final thing that is positive provisionally about President Trump is that President Trump not only understands that America's role in the world depends on a strong economy, he understands much better than his predecessor, to put it mildly, that a strong economy depends on deregulation, lower taxes, freer markets, and entrepreneurship. We're already reaping the benefits of President Trump deregulating the energy industry. If you read the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks ago, we are now #2 in world oil production, and the United States is a veritable energy powerhouse. Think of the foreign policy ramifications of that for the good. We don't have to let Putin blackmail Europe with natural gas. We don't have to be slave to any dangerous, radical, Middle East tin horn dictator. President Trump, remembering that wealth is created primarily by private enterprise, not by government, is an essential component to an American revival economically, on which America's vital role in the world depends. Finally, whatever I say about this is provisional. It depends on Trump staying his current optimistic course. It depends on President Trump having a greater degree of self-discipline. Victor Davis Hanson is a national treasure, probably our greatest military historian and a courageous commentator. And usually he gets this right. Conclude and then open it up for questions if there are any, by combining Machiavelli and Victor. I'm not Machiavellian, but Machiavelli's right about this. In The Prince, Machiavelli writes that the mark of a statesman is like a physician. You want a physician and a statesman to do the same thing. Diagnose the problem or the situation when it's difficult to diagnose but easy to cure, and then to prescribe the appropriate remedy. As the Rolling Stones put it, you can't always get what you want. President Trump's a brawler. He's an outer boroughs guy. I spent many years in New York. With his chip on his shoulder, extremely thin-skinned, volatile, unpredictable. And for those who say, oh, President Trump, don't worry if you're a conservative, worry. Keep in mind that the first Republican that President Trump ever voted for was President Trump. Keep in mind that he voted for Bill Clinton. Keep in mind he voted for Obama twice. Conservatives have to be very careful about this. Praise President Trump when he adheres to principle, but don't redefine your principles to the volatile person of President Trump. Let us hope that he stays this course. And this is where Victor comes in, tying it up with Machiavelli. Victor says that President Trump may be like chemotherapy. It's not pleasant. It makes you sick. There are unpleasant trade-offs. You lose your hair. And in some ways it's poison. But given the problems he faced, and given the alternative of Hillary Clinton, let us wish him well. And let us acknowledge, as the world has not, that he is heading in the right direction, and let us acknowledge however provisional, that deterrence is more robust, the United States is more secure, our friends are safer, our enemies have to think more than twice. Does anybody really think that the North Koreans would fear Hillary Clinton more than Trump? I mean, you have to be in a methadone clinic or a university professor. So let us hope that President Trump and the better angels of his nature named Mattis and Nikki Haley prevail. Let's give Donald Trump's foreign policy, the subject of my next book, 2 provisional cheers, and let's hope it metamorphosizes into 3. Thanks for your forbearance. Any questions, or have I appalled you beyond? Yes, sir, and then I'll.
My background is business,
Yep.
and I always found a team was the important part to getting done. Looking at Trump's team, who are the stars and who's going to keep Trump on course to make things happen?
Well, I'll tell you a personal story about that. James Mattis is terrific, and I hope Nikki Haley becomes president of the United States sooner rather than later. Secretary of Defense Mattis is a deep thinker. He's a warrior. He's a defense intellectual. If you look at the talk he gave at CSIS in Washington in April of 2016, laying out his assessment of the world, our position, what we needed to do about it, what the priorities should be. President Trump has largely, and to his credit, moved in Jim Mattis's direction. Again, some professors are not susceptible to flattery. I'm not one of them. In 2016, in October, I gave a book talk on that book at Stanford University, and I was sitting next to somebody who said, I really love the book, and I liked everything else you've written. Let me introduce myself, he said. I'm Jim Mattis. Now, at that moment when I was undecided, I wasn't going to vote for Hillary Clinton, but should I sit out? I thought to myself, do I want a mad dog? And I know John Kerry from Nantucket Island, where my father's from, or a lap dog. And so if you look at Mattis, McMaster, and Nikki Haley, but particularly Mattis and Nikki Haley, that's very solid, but here's a caveat. We all tend to do this. We all tend to think that presidents are puppets of their advisors. They aren't. Once you really do research, Obama was the leader of his pack. People underestimated Reagan. People thought Eisenhower was inarticulate, manipulated by John Foster Dulles. These people don't become president of the United States to delegate authority. President Trump has strong, they may be volatile, convictions. And the key in all of this is President Trump. Now, a bellwether is, for me, because this is why I say you have to evaluate Trump to the extent he remains faithful to conservative principles, cheer him when he does, oppose him when he doesn't. We're Jim Mattis and Nikki Haley to leave, and Steve Bannon and Mike Flynn to come back. Forgive me, but this audience seems to be old enough to remember the program Lost in Space. Well, at minute 42 of that program, the robot always was warning, danger, Will Robinson. The danger point would be if these people defected. But so far, at least, especially given where Trump was during the campaign, 90% of what he has done in substance is reassuring. Even his tweeting is Reagan-esque. Reagan used the radio to go over the heads of the American people. But what Trump has to do is to discipline himself and be more strategic. Forgive me, I know I'm on tape, but calling a country a shithole, that is not going to make a serious case for what should be a very persuasive argument grounded in principle. You concede too much by being undisciplined. And my concern about President Trump is his volatility, and whether he does have a core, and whether he will be here this way 6 months from now. For all that, having said that, he has governed much more like a Reagan conservative, as I would understand the term. Justice Gorsuch, the tax cut, his national security strategy. I don't think that the anti-Trumpers right now, who are on the conservative side and said, you know, the max boots, I don't think they have a case. If you look at what Trump has done, he's been 90% faithful to what you would have associated with a conservative like Marco Rubio, and the trajectories, you're not going to get 100%. But as Ronald Reagan put it, and I think this is true of Trump, Reagan said famously, except in rare circumstances where it's existential threats like Hitler or Stalin, Reagan said, I'd rather take 80% and establish a gravitational pull for more than all or nothing. And let's face it, so far, cross your fingers, maybe provisional, Trump has delivered on more than 80% if you're a Reagan conservative. And I think for the benefit of the country, the benefit of our allies, and he should be applauded for that. The criticism of Trump's substance is wildly disproportionate to the actual reality of his policies. Sir, you had a question, sir?
Well, you've answered the question that I was going to. But
that's my strategy. If I talk enough, people either forget the question or I answer it somehow.
Well, I'll pose it anyway. About a year ago, we had a talk by your predecessor at CU Boulder in conservative thought. His talk was basically his definition of what a conservative is. And I asked the first question then after that, and it was just about a year ago. Do you consider Trump, who was probably not yet president, or wasn't yet the inauguration, a conservative? And he had about 15 seconds of silence, and he just said, scratched his head, I don't know. Now you evidently have said he's at least an 80%.
No, I'm not sure he is a conservative.
Okay, then you're right.
But I am sure that he has governed like one. I'm not sure 6 months from now he will be one. But my point is that if you are a conservative, the standard should be evaluating his policies based on his fidelity. And if you look at what Trump has done, Trump has governed within the mainstream of Republican conservatism, as Ronald Reagan defined it. Not identically so, but 80 to 90%. And therefore, given that the choice is not ideal, I was at the University of Vermont for 12 years. I prepared a debate about Bernie Sanders. I described in a book, as I was profiled, I described Vermont as Cuba with a bad climate. Given what the alternative is and the trajectory of the Democratic Party since Obama, and if you say, if you're conservative, is Donald Trump where he is now? And that could change, and then it's conditional. But Donald Trump where he is now, to Elizabeth Warren, or Bernie Sanders, or the likely nominee for the Democratic Party, I think that the people like Max Boot, who are trying to ingratiate themselves bluntly with their friends, they're out to lunch. That given what they stood for previously, they should admit, maybe this guy is vulgar. Maybe you don't want him dating your daughter. Maybe you don't want him at the dinner table. Maybe he's Ralph Cramden meets Andrew Dice Clay in a suit. I got it all. But on the substance of things, he has governed with a remarkable and surprisingly high degree of fidelity. And if you want him to keep doing that, and you're on the conservative side, praise him when he lives up to your principles, criticize him when he doesn't, but just don't say reflexively, and also be historical about it. I've heard all sorts of nutty things on campus. I studied totalitarianism. You know, that Trump is a fascist, this, Mussolini, Hitler. Fascists do not abide by court orders as Trump did when the courts multiple times have struck down his immigration plans. Tyrants don't say, when Congress blocked health care reform, I accept that. Lenin suspends the Duma. Hitler stages a burning of the Reichstag. Trump is rough, vulgar. He may not have the ideal presidential temperament, but he is within the American tradition, and it's hyperbole and it's reactive devaluation to make him into a demon he's not. And I think that we've lost our senses in 2017. At least the left has, and their senses have never been. Look, the left has bitched at every law. They never lose graciously. 68. The argument was Nixon really didn't win. He went and manipulated the Vietnam War. 72 was Watergate. 80, supposedly there was nothing to it. Reagan manipulated the hostage crisis. Then there was Willie Horton. Then there was the Chads. They never just say they lost. And frankly, this is my prediction, and I may have to eat my words. You can probably criticize some of the Trump people for bad judgment, but there's absolutely zero evidence, and we would have heard it by now, given the investigation and the incentives for disclosing it. There is zero evidence that Trump committed anything remotely impeachable, much less removable, in this Russian situation. And all these Democrats who are complaining, they're born-again hawks. They were silent when Obama was, remember Obama? They don't mention this now, 2012, the open microphone, almost kissing Medvedev's shoes, saying, please tell Vladimir, if once I don't have to put up with this Nazi election. Remember Obama mocking Mitt Romney as if he was an idiot? You know, how could a sensible person think Russia was a threat? And now Democrats are born-again vigilance to Putin? I know hypocrisy is the tribute vice pays to virtue, but even for the Democrats, this is a little much. Yes, and then you, sir.
On career in oil and gas E&P, you're one of the few people that's alluded to the fact that a move towards energy independence here is actually a significant component of how we're going to be on the world stage.
It's huge. It's huge not only because of the benefits to our economy, it's huge because one of the things that our enemies have had in terms of leverage, Europeans have had an excuse. Well, we can't stand up to Putin because he controls our natural gas. Well, we can supply that. Or we have to soft pedal Iran or Iraq or these other dictatorships run by fanatical people, because after all, we need the energy. And energy independence is not only economically beneficial, it's geopolitically liberating for our allies and for the United States. You know, so for every fan of Solyndra and opponent of fracking, my response is, well, you know what? I'd rather have fracking than have to buy oil from Iran and fuel their nuclear weapons program. I'd rather have drilling, which has become, technology makes environments better. There are ways of doing, it's not an either-or thing. And if my choice is not being beholden to dangerous tyrants who hate us for who we are, that trade-off is very easy to me, and everybody who's in the energy business, who's doing this stuff, my response is thank you, because you're not only benefiting us at home, given what I do in international relations, you are adding a huge boost on steroids to American power and influence in the world, severing this gangrenous link we've had by necessity to these terrible regimes.
Thank you for saying that.
Can we make this the last question? So
Yes.
we have time to sign books?
Yes.
What do you think the outcome is going to be with North Korea? What's your projection?
I'm not sure what the outcome is going to be with North Korea. Here's the good news. I know what the outcome would have been with Hillary Clinton. And I helped Richard Nixon write his last book, and although that Trump has a degree of intrinsic volatility that should cause anybody 2 swallows, Nixon used to do this. Bad cop, good cop. Nixon would say, Kaufman, I used to convey I was a crazy, dangerous bastard. Henry was the good guy. Trump and Tillerson are doing a version of that. And the other thing that's probably good is that for all the malevolence and wickedness of the North Korean regime, and it can change. So there's no, this is probability analysis, and it's dangerous. We've actually deterred North Korea since 1953. North Korea is not quite like Saddam or Hitler, defiant of any type of risk. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know this, and I think Jim Mattis is right. You cannot let a regime like that develop an intercontinental ballistic missile capability to hit American territory, particularly the continental United States. Because if you do, you're basically saying the Indo-Pacific, like Europe was to world politics between 1500 and 2000, belongs to China, with all the negative consequences for freedom and prosperity that will flow. China is to world politics in the 20th century, 21st century, what Germany was between 1870 and 1945. And you can say, well, the good news is we have good Germans. We don't want to have to fight 2 world wars. My concern with China is not that China is number one. My concern with China is that China, like the Soviet Union in the 80s, is going to reach a reckoning. Inevitably, and everybody in this audience who's positive to Steamboat knows this, you can't combine continued economic growth with the monopoly and tyranny of the Communist Party. And when China reaches that reckoning, and there's some evidence that they've already begun to do that, I want them to face a Ronald Reagan the way the Soviet Union did in the 80s. So when the leadership contemplated its options, they knew that there was a vigilant, strong United States leading a democratic alliance system, so that the Soviet leadership said, "Niet, the jig is up." My concern, contrary-wise, is if we lower the barriers to aggression, a regime like China, the way the Imperial Japanese did in 1941, decide to roll the dice with all the dangers attended thereto. So this North Korean conflict, by the way, if we fold on North Korea, it's like Obama folding on Syria. Don't think that the problem is just Israel. The Iranians are watching. Putin's watching. And so it is essential to remain vigilant. And I have to say, so far, in terms of backing our allies, sending Mattis there 4 times, bolstering our relationship with India, who shares our interests, reaffirming our alliance with Japan, deploying missile defense in South Korea, the American military buildup. I give the Trump people an A for how they've handled the North Korean situation, and it's very reassuring that in a dangerous situation where you don't know how it's going to turn out and there is a risk, there are adults running it rather than sort of the second generation of the Chicago 7. Thank you very much for your focus.
All right, Professor Kaufman will be signing copies of his book out in the lobby, so I hope you'll stop by and get a copy signed. Also, I didn't say this earlier, but on the Campus Liberty Tour, the first 2 stops, April 2nd and 3rd in Boulder and then Colorado Springs, these are open to the public. You can buy tickets for $40 a piece. We'll have that up on our website soon, probably early next week. So we hope you'll join us for our first Campus Liberty Tour, and don't forget to register for the Freedom Conference. Thanks for coming. Have a great night.